So they've asked me to share on missional enterprise when the foundations are shaken. So that's what you're going to get. I'm guessing there's a lot of people in this room whose foundations have been shaken these last 3 years. And I know ours certainly have been. But let me introduce myself. As Eric said, my name is Eric. And my wife and I are one of 3 original couples that moved to Southeast Asia in 2003. We were all friends together from Wheaton College. Yes, I actually used to look like that. If you don't know which one of those people I am, that's because I don't look much like that anymore. But a lot of shaken foundations led to no hair anymore. Anyway, 2003 moved to Southeast Asia, and our purpose of going was to reach an unreached people group, a people group that we call the Sea Tribe people. We wanted to reach them with the good news of Jesus Christ. And the Sea Tribe people, it's a group of about several million, 2-3 million people. They live scattered across some 3,000 islands in Southeast Asia, and they're 99.9% Muslim. Our kind of method to get in when we were looking, this is obviously 20 plus years ago now, how are we going to get in? It became very clear to us that really the only avenue open to us was to go in with business. And so we kind of stumbled unknowingly into missional enterprise. And in order to have a business that put us into contact with these people, we started a resort hospitality business located right in the heart of the Sea Tribe Islands. You know, I could talk for an hour or 2 hours on all the things we do and what it looks like and this and that, but we find that one of the best ways to share that with you is to actually show you something. So I'm going to show you a quick promotional video. And this will hopefully give you a glimpse of what our resort business is like. Let's see if this works here. Sound will come, I think. Be taking reservations at the coffee break time if anybody wants to come stay. All right, well, we got into that and we began operations in 2004. And by 2019, by God's grace, we had 2 resorts that were active and operating and running in our area, 160 over staff. Those are full-time staff plus part-time staff and other vendors. We had a number of years in a row of over $3 million in revenue per year. 99% of our guests were high-paying foreigners, people coming in from outside of our country to come and stay. The government loved that, by the way. It's a great sell when you're dealing with the government. And for probably the last 15 years, at least leading up to COVID, we were the highest paying tourism hospitality tax entity in our region. So that's what God enabled us to get to. In 2020, that success and that progress became something very different. Overnight, everything changed. Let me show you what that looked like. All right. Did you see any guests? What did you hear? What? Say it, crickets. Crickets. There was bugs. There was insects. That was about all we had for a long time. Saturday, the 21st of March in 2020, we got word that Singapore would be closing its borders in 2 days. And the following day, Sunday, March 22nd, we ferried nearly a full house worth of guests back to Singapore, and we didn't have another guest for 6 months. 6 months. A week after this, a number of us were back out at the resorts, shutting them down, shuttering them. And in this picture, we're eating some, I think this is French toast, but the next course, you can see that dining room is basically empty, but the next course after this was eggs Benedict with lobster on top, because we were trying to get rid of our food stock, because if we didn't eat it, it was just getting thrown away. There was nothing else to do with it. And we actually threw away hundreds and hundreds of pounds worth of food. Our revenues dropped from $3.2 million in 2019 to $710,000 in 2020 to $120,000 in 2021. That's revenue. That's not, there was no profit. That was revenue. Unlike other areas of the world where there were bailouts and assistance from the government, we had none of that. In fact, the tax office in our country during COVID began special auditing processes to try to scrape together any money that they could get from people. That included us. Because we suddenly couldn't meet certain requirements from the central bank for businesses that had foreign-denominated loans, we also began to be hit with yearly fines. Fines that we had no ability to get clemency on, to get any dispensation on. So after this initial shock of COVID hitting and kind of just going through shutting down our resorts, we began to face obviously a lot of different challenges, a lot of different problems, and we were asking a lot of questions. Questions like, how are we supposed to plan when we don't know how long shutdowns and closed borders will last? Questions like, how can we use money wisely when we have to continue to pay fines and taxes, even without revenue? How do we keep staff working? How do we help them to maintain their skills? How do we provide for their families? How do we provide for ourselves? And how do we steward what God has given? The question we see in our passage from Psalm 11 is, what can the righteous do? We didn't phrase it like this in 2020 and 2021, but we were asking this question. We were saying, what can we do? What are we supposed to do? What should we do? And, I think pretty early on, the conclusion that we came to, I say we, there's a number of us that are in this team together, but there's also a number of men and women, some sitting in this room, who have been faithfully counseling and advising us for years. And I think they would say they felt a part of this, but what we came to, this conclusion is, we need to keep doing what we've always been doing, or at least what we should have always been doing. And so for us, there's 4 things that I kind of narrowed in on for this presentation today that I want to share with you. 4 things that we did. What can the righteous do? Keep doing what we've been doing, what we should have been doing. And for us, here are those things. Pray. We need to be men and women who pray. We wanted to refocus our desire to know God, to know what He wanted of us. We've been trying to do that throughout the years. I think there's been ebbs and flows of being more focused on that, but certainly COVID brought this back powerfully to us. So we reignited our prayer efforts amongst our kingdom-minded team. We began meeting 2 mornings a week for prayer. usually virtually on Zoom because we are scattered a little bit. And that has continued up until today. Twice a week meeting. Sometimes there's 2 of us, 3 of us. Sometimes there's 10 or 11 or 12. We're turning over our situations, our challenges, our fears to the Lord, and we're asking Him to help us steward His company. So prayer, focusing in on prayer. Focusing on our staff. From the beginning, this has been one of our main foci. I don't know what the proper English is here. I need my wife to help me. When you start to pick up more than one language, you start to lose what little ability you had in your original language. Focusing on our staff. So we made a decision early on. We didn't want to lay off or fire any of our team members. We had some contracts that finished that we didn't renew, but all of our permanent staff, we didn't fire anyone throughout COVID. We had some leave on their own accord. They wanted to go and get higher paying jobs, which we understood, but this was a commitment that we made, and we kept just over half our staff throughout COVID. By the end of COVID, we still had about half of our team left, or a little bit over. We wanted them to have meaningful work. We didn't want to give them busy work, but we wanted to give them meaningful things to do, keeping our facilities ready so that when COVID would end, we could hit the ground running, that we could start working again right away. We wanted to give them opportunities to work outside of our business. We had pulled everyone back to, we cut their pay by about 35% just because we had to do it. But we were actually only having them work about 40%, less than half time. So they had a lot of free time, and we encouraged them to find part-time jobs around them. And most of our teammates, most of our staff were able to get side jobs to augment their income and to help their families. And we were able to provide that opportunity for them to do that. A lot of our staff that lived in the city suddenly were struggling to afford these small apartments that they were renting. And so with the help of some donors and some people that came alongside, we were able to provide accommodation assistance for them as well. So focusing on our staff. We also wanted to focus on blessing the community. And once again, this was something that we'd been seeking to do from the beginning, since we landed in 2003. And we basically doubled down on this. We re-engaged hard with this during COVID. God provided a lot of financial resources that where people donated money, and we were able to actually hand out, I think the final count was somewhere over 4,000 care packages during a 25-month period of time. These were care packages with basic food supplies, household goods that families needed just to live their daily lives. And that went out to our staff, and it went out as well to a lot of people in the communities around our resorts. We had 9 university students that were receiving scholarships through our business when COVID hit. And after COVID came, they all assumed that those would be gone. And we prayed and spent some time talking about it, and we decided to continue to honor those scholarships. And so 8 of those 9 students actually graduated last year. And maybe it was 7 of them. But we've got about 6 of them that are currently working in our business. So we asked them to come and do a year-long internship with us. And so that's been a huge blessing as well. We've talked for years about starting a nonprofit. And finally, with COVID, we had a little more time on our hands. And so in early 2022, we got a foundation set up. And that very quickly enabled a number of things to be happening. We got a full-time English language teacher in, a young Christian guy who loves the Lord. And he's been teaching in villages around our resorts now for the past year plus. We began doing some finance classes for the communities around us. The feedback has just been absolutely phenomenal for the changes that families are experiencing in their lives as a result of having some basic financial planning skills, tools that they can utilize. So another focus for us, blessing the community. The last thing is stewarding the Lord's business. This business is not my business. It's not my business partner's business. This business is God's business. And we really wanted to focus in on stewarding well what he had given. What does he want us to do with this? Now for us, what did that mean? Well, cutting costs. Revenue was definitely cut significantly, but we worked hard the last number of years to cut costs. We sought new markets for revenue. Before COVID, we really didn't have any locals coming to stay at our resort. For 27 months, our borders were closed. There was no option for foreigners to get to us, even if they wanted to come. It was only people in country who could even reach us. And although we didn't have high occupancy by any stretch of the imagination, the revenue was still low, we did see local guests hear about us, begin to come. And the amazing blessing with that was it kept the staff that were still working, it gave them those opportunities to keep using their skills, to keep doing the things that they wanted to do, that they enjoyed doing. We raised debt. We brought in additional funding through various sources that allowed us to continue operating. And we worked hard to maintain the facilities, as I said, so that we could be ready when the COVID restrictions lifted. So prayer, focusing on our staff, blessing the community, stewarding the Lord's business. These were the things that we were trying to do before COVID. That was our plan and our goal. God really allowed us to refocus in on those during COVID. What are the righteous going to do? That's what God led us to do. I want you to hear how some of our staff describe their COVID experiences. And you'll hear some similarities, you'll hear some different things as well, but listen to what they have to say about how COVID was for them. You can read what they're saying. Can't hear their words, sorry. Are you able to read them? I'm glad we had those subtitles. Thanks, Mimi. Yeah, hopefully it's interesting to read what they had to say. If you want to hear their actual words, come find me later. I'll play you the original video. But you can see some of their concerns, some of their thoughts were a little different than mine as the business manager, but they were also working through things during COVID, and God was working in their heart as well, in their lives as well. So King David is faced with this question from his friends. What can you do? What can the righteous do when the wicked bend the bow, when the foundations are shaken or destroyed? And his friends had already given the answer, right? What did they tell him to do? Flee. Run. Because what can you do? It's almost a rhetorical question, actually, that's being asked. What can you do? I think all of us have times where our foundations are shaken, where they're maybe destroyed. What do we do? What does missional enterprise do? What should we do? Typical businesses probably do just that when they face challenges. They oftentimes flee, don't they? They flee into themselves or away from the problems. Those of us involved in missional enterprise realize that our businesses are not our own. We have a higher calling to what David describes in verse 1. What's the first thing he says in Psalm chapter 11? Anybody remember without looking it up? My refuge is in the Lord, or rather, take refuge in the Lord. When we take refuge in the Lord, we find that the words of Hebrews 12:28 are true. We have received, this is a promise. This is a promise. We have received a kingdom that cannot be shaken. The foundations may be shaken, they may be destroyed, but the kingdom in which we live and serve and work will not be shaken. For that, let us be grateful. As you think of us, as you guys are reminded of us, we appreciate your prayers. We need more prayers for wisdom, more prayers for guests to come and join us. In Southeast Asia, travel is still not back to where it was pre-COVID. It's still down, so we appreciate your prayers with that, and as well as continuing to replace team members we lost during COVID, especially looking for godly men and women that want to join us. Our hope as well is to be breaking ground on a third resort amongst a new unreached people group later this year. So appreciate your prayers for that as we're still looking for financing on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We get to travel around the world. He covers all of Asia. I get to cover the western half, and we can multiply our time by having the same name. So we're going to open up some audience questions for Eric here in a second. So if you want to have a question, just get it ready, and there should be a couple of mics going around the room. Just raise your hand, and we can pass the mic over to you. But Eric, what's next? What's next for you guys?
Good question. Yeah, I think getting the current business back up and running fully and seeing these entities being utilized for God's kingdom in this place, continuing to see them utilized in this way, it's a big thing for us. Before COVID had started, we'd begun to look at this expansion into a new people group. It's a location that's about an hour away from where we live, hour flight away from it, and wanting to get a new team set up in a new location with a third resort. And so that's something that we're working hard on. So that's coming up next as well.
You mentioned about the third of the triple bottom line, the spiritual aspect of what's going on.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking that. One of the things we found during COVID was that we're in a context where having spiritual conversations can be tricky a Muslim context, although it's not difficult, believe it or not. I actually find it much more difficult to get into spiritual conversations in the U.S. than I do in our context. But we found during COVID that the opportunities just ratcheted, they went up significantly to be able to have conversations, to be able to talk and to share. We talk about showing and sharing the love of Christ where we are. I loved talking about ministry in deed. As Henry's not here maybe, but that's something we've noticed, that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so being able to live out the love of Christ leads to those opportunities to share. So we've had, I think, just a lot of renewed opportunities with that. We've got people who are growing in their faith, some that are reaching out to their family members, to their neighbors. We've seen a lot more people coming from a traditional Christian background who've come to faith. We've seen some coming from a Muslim background who have come to faith. Obviously want to see a whole lot more of that, so pray for that as well, if you would. Does that kind of answer the question? Thanks. Don't give him the microphone.
Hey, I came from India, so I can ask any question I want.
That was a laugh.
Eric, we love what you guys are doing. You all were a tremendous role model during this time, you and your colleagues. But in hindsight, what would you do differently? What comes to mind? I know you haven't had time to think about it. Maybe you did, but you guys did a lot of things right. But we all can learn. What can we learn from you that you guys may have done differently or done sooner or whatever?
There's things we would, if we look back now, 3 years later, certainly there's things we would have done. If I had known in April of 2020 what I know now, I would have done things differently. But I don't know that means that if I were to face a similar situation again, I would necessarily do it differently, because we don't go into facing these foundation-shaking events knowing what's actually going to come. And so what I think what we're called to do is take our refuge in the Lord, follow him, and go where he leads. So I can easily say, oh yeah, we should have cut costs more quickly. We should have, we should have done this, we should have done that. But I don't know that that's only what we can say, knowing what happened over 3 years. So I remember I think it was in mid-March, Jack left the room, Ron, in mid-March when we had a call with our advisors, and I remember saying, listen, more than likely by the fall we'll be back up and running, but we're projecting, just to be safe, we're projecting that it'll be Christmas before we really reopen, Christmas of 2020. And then I remember talking again in October on a call with these guys saying, all right, we think by the spring we'll be open again, like with people coming from outside the country, but to be conservative, let's plan on the summer of 2021. Well, borders in Asia didn't reopen until February, March, April of 2022. So we had 27 months where we experienced borders that were shut. A little different than I think maybe some of the countries in other parts of the world. But we didn't know that. I mean, even as we're going through it, so what would we do differently? Here's what I would say. What I would want to do the same and even better is focusing on the Lord and lean on what he's calling us to do. Trust that he's leading us in the right direction. If I were to do anything differently, I'd want to do that even more.
Okay,
As a result of, would you have a larger emergency fund for the future, or would that be a lack of faith considering what traditionally old businesses do have for an emergency fund?
You know, we had so many arguments before COVID. I was always pushing that we should have more cash around, and others were always saying we have too much cash around, and we did, probably based on common business practices, best practices. We had too much cash on hand, and that's one of the things that got us through COVID. So I'm guessing there's companies all over the world that are rethinking these kind of things going forward. Now that we've seen, I don't want to say arbitrary, but the ability for governments to just literally one day to the next, shut things down, I think there are companies all over the world that are rethinking that. I don't know if we haven't discussed that. We haven't discussed that yet for ourselves. It's a good question.
Okay, one more. I think we have time for one more question. John?
Yes, so how did how did you help your family? I'm sure the impact of all of this on you guys that were running the business was a lot. I'm sure that flowed into the families. How did you, in your family, help with that whole situation?
I think our desire, and I don't know how well we did it, but our desire was probably to take our family through, in one sense, the same process that we were going through. What does God want from us during this time? How do we focus in more on Him? I think the beautiful thing for us was I don't think our families were nearly as impacted as we in the business were. Our kids, we've got a little homeschooling community that we're a part of, and they've got their close friends that they interact with. School education didn't really change for them during COVID. I think they probably felt their dad's stress, and other families felt the stress of some of the people working in the business. But the other upside we experienced was we had a lot more time with our families. The resorts were shut down for months on end, and even when we reopened them, we were only running 5% occupancy. So you'd go 6, 10, 12 days without a guest, even once we were open again. We had a lot more time to be with our families, and you saw my staff talking about what were some of their takeaways from COVID. I mean, what did they learn from COVID? What did God teach them, or what did God give them? And one of the things I think a number of us have talked about is just really great times with our family was something that we gained. As much as COVID took, God also gave a lot during COVID. One of those things was good time with our family. So hopefully, if you when you next see my kids, ask them. Hopefully they would say, God really blessed us in COVID. We just had good times together. He led us. He directed us. I hope they would say that. You can test it, John, next time you see my kids. Thank you, brothers and sisters.